In 2019, a man volunteered to help search for a missing 7-year-old girl in a quiet Oregon town. He signed in at 6:42 a.m., got his vest, walked into the woods. He never came back. There was no struggle, no body, no clues, just a broken flashlight, and a journal buried in moss 3 years later. Inside the journal were 54 entries, and the last one said, "I turned around and saw myself." Dark before dawn. True crime that shouldn't exist. I know you can't sleep without one more crime story, so get comfortable, because this one is different. This isn't a story about a killer hiding in the shadows. It's about someone who was supposed to help find them. It's about a volunteer, a man who walked into a forest to search for a missing child and never came back. They called it a tragic accident, until someone found his journal. And page by page, it told a story no one was ready for. This is the case of David Holt. And if you think you know how this ends, you don't. Welcome to Dark Before Dawn. David Holt wasn't supposed to be a story. He was 38, divorced, mild-mannered. He worked part-time at a hardware store in Silver Glen, a small town in Oregon you've definitely never heard of unless you grew up there. The kind of town where people say hello in grocery aisles and still leave their doors unlocked. That kind of town. David had lived there most of his life. Quiet, polite, not especially close to anyone. No criminal record. No drama. Not even a social media account. Just a man who showed up to work on time and fed the neighbor's dog when they were away. But on October 19th, 2019, something happened in Silver Glen that changed everything. Her name was Sophie Brennan. 7 years old. Blonde. Always wore purple. She left her grandmother's house on a Saturday afternoon. Theories exploded. Serial killer, underground tunnels, wild animals, abduction. But without evidence, without bodies, and without answers, everything stopped. After 3 weeks, the town went quiet again. The posters faded. The hashtags disappeared. And people just tried to forget. Until 2022. Until a man walking his dog in the forest tripped over something buried in the dirt. A metal box. Rusted shut. Inside was a journal. And the name on the first page was David Holt. The journal was standard, small, spiral-bound, black cover, weather-warped, edges soft. But inside, the pages were surprisingly intact. There were 54 entries. No dates, no titles, just one sentence written across the inside of the front cover. If you find this, tell them I didn't imagine it. The first few pages were exactly what you'd expect from a man helping in a child search. Search grid 12. Mossy ground, wet leaves. Nothing unusual. Saw deer. And then, silence. 10 blank pages. And after that, something else. The handwriting changed. Sloppy, harder to read. Sentences broken. Words misspelled. Thoughts unfinished. Not alone. Never was. Sophie not lost. Sophie taken. Sophie, here. I saw her eyes. She saw mine. She smiled. Wrong teeth. Trees move. Brown soft. Time loops. I woke up and my shoes were gone. I was walking for 20 minutes. My watch says 7 hours. The discovery of David Holt's journal and the photo tucked inside reignited a case that had gone cold for 3 years. The man who found it had just been walking his dog, cutting through a trail that had been closed since the early spring rains. When he tripped over something buried under wet moss, he thought it was an old toolbox. But it wasn't. It was a rusted metal case, sealed tight, and inside it was the last thing anyone in Silver Glen expected to see. A journal, and the name written on the cover, David Holt. The next morning, the sheriff's office officially reopened the investigation. The former lead detective, Mira Kessler, came out of retirement to consult. She'd always believed something wasn't right with the original story. The idea that a grown man simply got lost on a volunteer search and vanished without a trace. But she never had anything to go on. Now she did. And then there was the photograph. It was buried in the back flap of the journal, printed on old glossy paper, scratched, faded at the corners. But you could make out what was in it. David's orange volunteer vest, hanging from a branch. And behind it, just out of focus, a small figure, low to the ground, wearing something purple, smiling. The public wasn't supposed to see the photo, but someone leaked it. It spread across Reddit in hours. Then TikTok. Then it was everywhere. And with it came the speculation. People called it everything from evidence of a supernatural entity to a glitch in time. Theories piled up. Portals, mimicry, forest loops, child spirits. But the strangest reactions didn't come from strangers online. One volunteer said she'd seen something moving in the trees, something low, like a person crawling, but it disappeared when she turned. Another said he heard what sounded like a child humming close by, even though his entire group was adults. A few admitted they'd passed the same stretch of woods multiple times, even though their GPS said they were on new ground. And then there were the radios. Search team leaders remembered the walkie-talkies malfunctioning, not just static, but voices repeating, messages overlapping. One of them, a man who had led the Eastern sweep, claimed he heard his own voice on the line, repeating a sentence he hadn't yet said out loud. All of this had been dismissed at the time, written off as stress, fatigue, panic, but after the journal surfaced, it all started to make sense. Or, at least connect. A week after the journal was submitted into evidence, the sheriff's department authorized a second sweep of Grid 12, the area David had originally been in. The sheriff said there was no threat to the public, no cause for alarm, but locals in Silver Glen felt differently. People stopped going into the woods. Even teenagers, usually fearless when it came to ghost stories, started avoiding the back trails. Some said their dogs refused to step past the tree line. Others claimed their GPS would freeze or reroute them back to the start, no matter where they went. One woman said she heard a child laughing, high-pitched and close, even though she was alone. So what really happened in the woods? Let's assume for a moment that the journal is real, that David Holt really did write what he saw, or believed he saw. There are a few ways to interpret it. Theory 1. Psychological breakdown. The most common explanation is the simplest. David got lost, panicked, and suffered a full psychological collapse. Prolonged isolation, physical exhaustion, lack of sleep, all of it could have triggered a psychotic episode. It's not uncommon in survival cases. There's even a name for it. What's madness? A dissociative state that affects orientation, memory, and perception. People see things, hear voices, walk in circles, lose track of time. Maybe David started hallucinating. Maybe he imagined the lights, the laughter, the girl in the trees. Maybe the journal was written during a full mental break, not as evidence, but as delusion. It fits a lot of the fact. Theory 2. Human intervention. Another theory, the one some locals quietly believed, is that David saw something he wasn't supposed to. Not supernatural, just human. That he stumbled across someone living off-grid. Someone hiding. Someone dangerous. It's not impossible. The forest behind Silver Glen is vast, mostly unpatrolled. Old logging roads stretch for miles. It's not out of the question that someone could be living out there, undetected, especially in the colder months. And Sophie? Maybe she wasn't taken by a stranger. Maybe she walked into something already happening. Maybe David followed. If this theory is true, it means the girl in the photo might still be alive. Or it means something far worse, that she was already gone, and what David saw wasn't her. There's no solid evidence for this theory. No trace of camps. No tracks. But it's easier to believe in a man with violent intent than in a forest that thinks. At least, for most people. Theory 3. The unexplainable. And then there's the theory no one wants to say out loud. The one that creeps into the edges of every late-night conversation about this case. That something in the forest isn't human. That the journal isn't fiction. That what David saw was real. A mimic. A presence. A loop. Something ancient, beyond language, that watches and waits and remembers every footprint in its soil. If you read enough of the journal, slowly, carefully, you start to notice patterns. David keeps returning to certain places, even when he thinks he's moving. What does that mean? Most people don't want to answer that question. And maybe they're right. Whatever the explanation, one thing is certain. David Holt believed it. Every page, every scratch of pen on paper, it wasn't written for attention. He wasn't trying to go viral. He never intended anyone to read it. He thought he was leaving a warning. And that should scare us more than anything. Because either he died believing in something that wasn't real, or something very real didn't want him to leave. In the final part of this story, we'll look at how the town responded in the years that followed, how the families of both victims live now, and what was found near Grid 12, just last fall, something that could change this case forever. After the journal was found, and after the second search ended, most of the world moved on. The posts stopped, the theories faded, the hashtags dried up, but Silver Glen didn't forget. The Brennan family, Sophie's parents, moved 2 towns over. They don't speak to reporters anymore. Once a year, on October 19th, someone leaves a purple ribbon tied to the gate behind the orchard. No one sees who. No one asks. David Holt's house was sold. The hardware store where he worked put up a small plaque. In memory of David, a quiet man who gave more than he had. But the woods? The woods kept their silence. And then, in the fall of 2023, 4 years after David vanished, something happened again. A local trail runner, someone who didn't even live in Silver Glen, went off course during a morning run. He crossed over the old flood path behind Grid 12, cutting through a section that had been blocked off for years. And in a dried creek bed, beneath a fallen log, he found something. A backpack. It was torn, faded, water-damaged. Inside was a flashlight, broken, a crushed metal canteen, and a small spiral notebook, soaked beyond recovery. But tucked deep in a side pocket, zipped shut, was a scrap of paper, folded tight. So now we're here. A girl disappeared. A man vanished. A journal surfaced. And the forest is still standing. And maybe the scariest part isn't what happened. Maybe it's the idea that it's still happening. That someone else might hear laughter near Grid 12. That someone else might turn around and see their own face looking back. That someone might find this story and go looking. If you do, remember what David wrote. If you find this, don't come looking. Sleep well. If you can,